Shalom Uvracha from Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. With the help of God, we continue this evening our joint study of Pirkei Avot, of the Ethics of the Fathers. Currently studying Chapter 2, Mishnah 5. This is Part 2 of the 5th Mishnah. Pirkei Bet, Mishnah Hey, Chelek Bet of this Mishnah. We began the Mishnah last week. We were unable to complete it. You never can complete it, the Mishnah, but even on a superficial level, we didn't read through it. We are learning here the teachings of one of the most famous rabbis. His name is Hillel. Last week we spoke about Hillel Omer al tifrosh min hatzibur. Do not separate yourself from the community. Do not separate yourself from positive communal activities. And tonight we continue with this teaching. V'al ta'amin ba'atzmecha ad yom motecha. Don't be overly confident. Don't be so sure of yourself until the day of your death. Until you're leaving this world and you can look back and say, okay, my journey was successful. Don't feel that you can speak with arrogance or with conceit or with self-assuredness that you will never sin, or that you will never err, or that you will never be tempted. Al ta'amin ba'atzmecha ad yom motecha, until the very end of your life. And on a superficial level even, the continuation from al tifrosh min hatzibur, we have tried in our studies to find some thread that unites the teachings in each Mishnah. Al tifrosh min hatzibur means you need a community. You need a community to keep you together. You need a community to make sure to validate your activities. You can't just go at it both by yourself. Well, I don't need a tzibur. I'm learning enough. I'm righteous enough. No, I don't need a tzibur. Al tifrosh min hatzibur is the first teaching of Hillel in our Mishnah, and he continues with V'al ta'amin ba'atzmecha ad yom motecha. Perhaps the emphasis on the word atzmecha. We are a group together. We have a group. There's a group dynamic, and we help each other. We support each other, and part of that group is protecting each other, and even lovingly criticizing each other. But if you're all by yourself, who's going to criticize you? Al ta'amin ba'atzmecha. No one is above temptation. No one is above sin. Kohelet teaches that there is no righteous person on earth who does only good, without sinning, without erring. So if you're part of the human race, al ta'amin ba'atzmecha ad yom motecha. Don't be so confident that everything you will do is as good as everything that you did do. And even everything that you did do, al ta'amin ba'atzmecha. Now the most famous quotation that's quoted in almost all of the commentaries on this Mishnah is the teaching in Masechet Berachot. In Tractate Berachot, we find that the rabbis speak. They quote this Mishnah. Those interested, it's on page 29a of Berachot, Perek Revi'i, Daf Kaftet Amud Aleph. They say, well, it says in Pirkei Avot, Al ta'amin ba'atzmecha ad yom motecha, and then they continue with the following follow-up. Shaharei Yochanan Kohen Gadol. There was this famous religious personality, Kohen Gadol, the highest position in the religious Jewish community. He ran the temple service. Shimesh b'kuhuna gedola shmonim shana. I'll read it on its most literal level of reading, although it's not necessarily the only way to read it. He served as a Kohen Gadol for 80 years. Could you be more? He was a Kohen Gadol. 80 years. And then, says the Gemara, Ulev Hasov, and at the end of his life, Asa Tzedoki. He left the pathway of righteousness of the Torah tradition, and he took on the pathway of the Sadducees. He took on the pathway which denied the validity of some of the most basic teachings in our tradition. How could it be? How could it be? I mean, now I saw certain commentaries. If you're interested, I recommend you see some of the notes on 29a of Berachot by people such as Rabbi Steinzal, who says it's not necessarily to be read as literal, that this particular person, perhaps it's a description of the descendants of the Hasmonean line of the Hashmonaim, and maybe that spanned 80 years, and it means that even though there were so many people who seemed to be so righteous in that period, at the end, maybe they turned away from God. But even, however you want to read it, it means that there is a possibility of leaving the pathway of righteousness. Be careful. Can you imagine every single year, every single month, and a person builds up such self-confidence. And Hillel, one of the world's experts in Torah, teaches us that a person has to be very careful in not growing so self-assured. The rabbis teach in the Talmud Yerushalmi, it's in the first chapter of Masechet Shabbat, on Mishnah Perek Aleph Halacha Gimel of the Talmud Yerushalmi. The rabbis teach, they quote our teaching, and they quote two different stories here. The Mishnah is quoted in the Yerushalmi, that's the Eretz Yisrael Talmud. As you know, there's Talmud Bavli and Talmud Yerushalmi, not necessarily from Yerushalayim, but maybe all of Eretz Yisrael is called Yerushalayim. I don't think it was Yerushalayim, but maybe Yerushalayim is a concept of all of Eretz Yisrael. Atida Yerushalayim Shetit Pashet L'chol Eretz Yisrael. Some people call it the Talmud de B'nai Marabah, the Talmud of Eretz Yisrael. They quote here a story. I mean, it's a painful story about a great rabbi who maybe violated the teachings of the early rabbis. And there's a teaching in the Mishnah that a person is not allowed to read by a certain kind of oil lamp on Friday night. Because when you're intensely studying or reading by an oil lamp, and sometimes you feel that the light is flickering, and you want to make sure that you get to read, you may tip the lamp, you may tip the oil to get closer to the wick, and you will be igniting fire on Shabbat. Lo teva'aru esh b'chol moshavotechem b'yom HaShabbat. So there is a teaching that the person is not allowed to read by certain kinds of lights. It's a teaching in the Mishnah. V'lo yikra l'or hanir. Along came one of the greatest rabbis. I guess I could say his name, although I mean the name is in the Torah. Rabbi Ishmael. And Rabbi Ishmael saying, that's not going to happen to me. And perhaps the masses, the masses, maybe they'll forget about Shabbat. I'm going to forget about Shabbat. It's not going to happen to me. And, so therefore I can read by oil lamp on Friday night. According to at least one version of the Gemara, there are two versions. According to one version of the Gemara, one version says he almost violated the Shabbat. The other version of the Gemara is discussed both in Talmud Bavli and in Talmud Yerushalmi. The reason why I'm quoting Talmud Yerushalmi is because the Talmud Yerushalmi has, the association with our Mishnah of Al Ta'amin Ba'atzmecha. Al Ta'amin Ba'atzmecha. Ad Yom Motecha is right after this story in the Yerushalmi. The other version of the story is that Rabbi Ishmael was reading on a Friday night, and he desecrated the Shabbat. Rabbi Yishmael desecrated the Shabbat Friday night. He and he said, when the temple will be built, I will have to bring a very serious sin offering. Very serious sin offering. I'm not the one to criticize Rabbi Yishmael, and I surely wouldn't say it unless it was in the Talmudic literature. But it's here. Al ta'amin ba'atzmacha. Are you really above the law? Is anyone above the law? Is anyone above, temptation? Or can it be that even if you're on the greatest rabbi, even if your name is Rabbi Yishmael, and there's a principle of be careful, not to read in a certain kind of way, then it applies to you also. But no, I'm Rabbi Yishmael. Yes, you are Rabbi Yishmael, you're very great. But al ta'amin ba'atzmacha ad yom motecha. There is a continuation in the Talmud Yerushalmi of someone who said, this doesn't mean yom motecha. And he says, ma'aseh b'chasid echad. It happened with a certain great pious person who was studying our Mishnah, and he felt that maybe a textual amendation was in order. Maybe it doesn't really mean till the day you die. It means till you grow old. I mean, once you're old already, once you're elderly already, what's the chances that you'll violate? So haya shoneh, yoshev shoneh, al ta'amin ba'atzmacha ad yom ziknutecha, or ad yom ziknutecha, until you get into the old age. Once you get into old age, you've already, been over. You've already mastered this art of self-control, and therefore he wanted to either interpret. I don't know if he really means that he changed the language of the Mishnah. I don't think that's what we do. We don't just change languages of the Mishnah, but I mean he reinterpreted the Mishnah to mean Yom Motecha doesn't mean Yom Motecha. It means the day of your death. It means when you're no longer 25 years old. You're no longer 35. You're already well into your latter years, and then there's a whole story here. There's a whole story about how he was tempted into sin. He was tempted into sin. There's some kind of discussion. Maybe it was only a spiritual manifestation, of some form of temptation. But I mean, the language of the Gemara is that it was a ruach, of some kind of spiritual force that came to tempt him. But maybe he was trying to be taught the lesson. No, not ad yom ziknutecha. Hillel teaches ad yom motecha, right? Till it means your whole life. And that could be connected also to the next part of the Mishnah, the next line of the Mishnah, of Hillel's teaching. V'al tadin et chavercha ad shetagia lemkomo. Don't judge anyone else until you've been in their shoes, until you reach their particular position. It's easy, to say that I am great and they're terrible, right? You could say that. I mean, who was it that said every time you point one finger at someone else, you point at least 3 fingers to yourself? Whatever, you could say that. Yeah, they're no good, and you could put down the rest of the world. But have you ever been in the position of that other person? So maybe, once again, the thread of the teachings of Hillel, the thread of the teachings of this Mishnah is, don't only be so egocentric to think only of yourself and to think of your own greatness without realizing that other people, if they did fall, spiritually speaking, if they did err, if they did transgress, maybe you would also transgress. So, this whole idea of, I don't need a tzibur, I don't need a community, and it doesn't apply to me because you know who I am, and I am, and they are not. Al tadin et chavercha ad shetagia lemkomo. Now, there is an interpretation, I believe, either by the Baal Shem Tov or by one of the students of the Baal Shem Tov, the Hasidic teacher, that the way God judges us is that God puts us in a position where we judge others, or we are judged by the way we judge others. Sometimes we're put in that very same position, and the same way we act is the way that God acts towards us. In other words, somehow we make judgments about other people, and those judgments about other people reflect how God makes judgments about us. And so you never know really what's going on. Maybe you're in a certain place at a certain time, in a certain position, and maybe when you're condemning someone else, you think you're condemning them. What you're really doing is condemning yourself. God is waiting to see. Will you explain? Will you explain? Maybe there were special circumstances. Maybe there's a reason. Maybe there's a reason why this person did it. Maybe we could find some level of justification. Maybe we could find some mitigating circumstances which could reinterpret their action, or maybe the drive was so strong that they couldn't control it. Whatever you say. But if you say absolutely, condemned, well, maybe. You remember what happened with David HaMelech? Remember David HaMelech? So when Nathan comes to him, when the prophet Nathan comes to him, he doesn't say to him, you're guilty over your association with Bathsheba. He tells him a whole story about a man with a... Remember the story? Yeah, with a poor man with a sheep, and when the wealthy man has many sheep, and the poor man... And King David, so strong to condemn that one person. And he points to him, you are that person! That's who you are! That's the Baal Shem Tov's teaching. Now, there are several places in Shas, several places in the Talmud, I'll just quote one or two, where the rabbis speak very harshly, seemingly. And again, the names of these rabbis, the names of these rabbis are so outstanding. I hesitated before I quote it, but I hope it's okay to quote. I'm quoting from Kiddushin, Tractate Kiddushin, the Talmud Bavli, Kiddushin 81a. And the rabbis say there that some of the greatest rabbis in the world, amongst them Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Akiva, Hava, Mitlotzetz, Ba'overei Avera. Rabbi Akiva mocked those who transgressed sins of immorality. Mitlotzetz. Laughed at him.
Mock.
What?
Mock.
Very, very polite to do this on...
לבריאות הרב, כל הברכות הרב, כל הברכות. תמשיכו ללמד אותנו לפחות עוד מיליארד שנה הרב. ורפואה שלמה לרבנית ולכל המשפחה. וזיווגים טובים הרב. ושתהיו שמחים, ופסח כשר ושמח וכולי. לבריאות הרב.
What's the proper thing to do when you're supposed to sneezing?
I can't edit it.
What are you supposed to do?
לישועתך קיוויתי אדוני.
That's correct.
ואז ברוך תהיה למי
Do I have to be embarrassed? Is this just human?
No, you're human.
What do actors and actresses do?
You have to remember that then...
What do they do? What do they do?
They did.
What do singers do? They start sneezing in the middle of a song.
They cut the tape and they restart it again.
Yeah, they're sorry.
Live performances.
But I can't do that.
בעזרת השם הייתי דפצ'י, בעזרת השם, ברוך השם הייתי דפצ'י.
Is it okay? Is this offensive to
It's
anyone?
No, it's
wonderful.
No.
What?
You cut the cameras.
No, the cameras wasn't... Okay, anyway. Maybe I shouldn't be saying what I'm saying,
Every shiur at least 3-4 upchi.
I said, the rabbis teach that if someone starts sneezing in the middle of their prayers, so, rabbis have a lot to say about it.
It's a good thing.
I don't know what it means. Yeah, okay, whatever. No, that's why there's some people who hand out snuff.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
where does that come from? Some synagogue. They hand out like these...
The little brown.
Yeah.
The
Maybe some... What? Yes, well, yeah, so some people say that maybe... we have one right here. Show and tell. Right? Thank you. Why do they hand out these spices? Because maybe what the Gemara there means is that if someone starts sneezing, maybe this is some kind of sign of like their prayer being accepted. So maybe it's a way of starting to sneeze. So they used to give out. I don't know if that's really the origin of it. That's what I once read it. Anyway, so it says that Rabbi Akiva hava mitlotzeitz ba'ovrei avera. Rabbi Akiva hava mitlotzeitz ba'ovrei avera. In other words, let's say you say, come on, wait, oh, please, ridiculous. He couldn't control himself. He couldn't control it. Hava mitlotzeitz. He spoke with, in a scornful way. Would that be a good translation? Mitlotzeitz. He laughed. He mocked them. I'll read Rashi. Rashi says, mitlotzeitz ba'avera. Omer shenakelhu lidgaber al yitzro imayurotzim. That's not a big deal. What's the big deal to be pure? What's the big deal to be involved with self-control? There's nothing, right? There's nothing. Rabbi Meir Havad. I don't know if you understand who we're talking about here. Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Meir, this is the most outstanding. Rabbi Meir, Hava mitlotzeitz, ba'ovrei avera. Rabbi Meir, mocked those people who fell into the temptation of sin. Shnakelhu. They thought that Shnakelhu litgaber al yitzro. Sin. It's easy. What's the big deal? Right? It's nothing. Come on, just push it away. And I won't go into the details, but this is homework for anyone interested. Read Kiddushin 81a and read about two very, very, very telling stories. One about Rabbi Meir and one about Rabbi Akiva. How they were tempted. Very, very, very close to grave sins. Al tadin et chaverecha ad shetagia lemkomo. How they were so energetic in pursuing what seemed to be sinful behavior. It wasn't really sinful. It appears to be sinful. Whatever it is, just read the details in Kiddushin 81. Don't be so quick to condemn someone else. Have you gone through such a temptation? Have you been in such a position? If not, al tadin et chavercha ad shetagia lemikomo. We haven't completed the Mishnah, but I hope to continue with the help of Hashem. Next time, I do hope that we'll be able to live up to the teachings of Hillel, each one in his or her own way, of seeing to it that we understand that a person has to be careful. Instead of criticizing others, if you're really into criticism, maybe you should start with the one in the mirror. I mean, I don't know if you have to start there. Maybe you should build yourself up also. But if you have to criticize, let's say start there and see how far you go after that. Al tamin ba'atzmecha ad yom motecha, v'al tadin et chavercha ad shetagia l'mkomo. Thank you so much for listening. Shalom v'bracha.